My dad broke my finger with hammer for asking why my sister got steak and I got scraps. Useless girls don't deserve fingers. Dad laughed. Trash, get scraps. Mom spat. I fed them a revenge they couldn't swallow. My name is Lydia, and if I could go back to when I was 9, I'd tell that little girl 2 things. 1, you're not crazy. 2, you're not the mistake they said you were. But when you're that young, everything feels like your fault. Especially when the people you're supposed to trust the most treat you like a stain they can't scrub out. I didn't grow up in a house. I grew up in a performance, and I was always cast as the background. We lived in a 2-story colonial with blue shutters that peeled every winter and a creaky porch swing no one used. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban house in Fayetteville. The kind people drive by and think, that must be a nice family. But inside, everything echoed. Even the laughter. It had that forced metallic clang to it, like it had been recorded and played back by someone who didn't know how real joy sounded. Cassidy, my older sister by 3 years, was the miracle child. At least, that's what my parents said at every church potluck and school meeting. She was born after years of trying, as Mom would say, with a performative sigh and a sympathetic glance toward whichever adult was listening. When I came along, I was the surprise, the accident, the tag-along mistake. There's a photograph my mother used to keep on the mantle, Cassidy's 2nd birthday party. She's in a yellow dress, surrounded by balloons, cake on her cheeks, and eyes sparkling from the camera flash. I'm in the background, maybe 6 months old, sitting on the floor, chewing on a ribbon. You can barely see me, like I was an afterthought even in that moment. That photo used to haunt me. It wasn't what it showed, but what it didn't. My mom used to say she was tired a lot. That's why I had to be quiet. She'd sit at the kitchen table in her pink robe, smoking menthols and sipping black coffee while Cassidy painted at the island counter with fancy acrylics. I got paper napkins and a pen that barely worked. You don't need colors, she told me once. You're not the artistic type. Dad worked at a supply chain yard, something with freight or management, I never knew. He came home smelling like motor oil and sawdust, always exhausted, always irritated. He had a voice like gravel and hands that could crack a walnut. When he looked at Cassidy, his eyes softened. When he looked at me, they sharpened. The only time he smiled at me was when someone else was watching. Dinner was a ritual. Cassidy got plates that looked like restaurant meals. Sometimes it was roast chicken with rosemary, sometimes spaghetti with meatballs the size of apples. I got leftovers, bits of fat trimmed from meat, old rice, once even just 3 crackers and a slice of cheese. I asked once why our plates were different. My mom didn't even look up. Cassidy's a growing girl, she said. You're just... Lydia. I used to sneak into Cassidy's room when no one was home. It smelled like vanilla and something flowery, too clean. Her shelves were lined with trophies from cheer, dance, gymnastics. Half of them she didn't even earn. My parents bought them for her when she came in 2nd or 3rd. You were the best in spirit, Dad would say. Meanwhile, I once got a silver medal in a spelling bee, and it ended up in the junk drawer. School was the only place I felt like I existed. My teachers liked me. Miss Carver even let me sit by her desk during recess when I had nowhere else to go. I read a lot. Got lost in books about brave girls who ran away, who saved kingdoms, who mattered. But every day at 3:15, the bell would ring, and I'd have to return to a house where I was invisible until I made noise. And the noise came eventually. It was subtle at first. The sighs when I entered the room, the flinch when I asked a question, the bruises brushed off as clumsiness. But the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the silence afterward. The way no one spoke of it. The way Cassidy hummed while brushing her hair in the mirror, unfazed by my tears. The way Mom turned the volume up on the TV. The way Dad lit another cigarette and mumbled something about respect. The dinner where I asked about the steak, that wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. The culmination of years spent being chipped away at until I barely recognized myself. But even then, even with the hammer raised, part of me still hoped he'd stop, hoped Mom would scream, hoped Cassidy would finally see me. None of that happened. What did happen changed everything. Because after that night, I wasn't just the forgotten daughter anymore. I was the leftover. And leftovers, when stored right, don't rot. They ferment. They grow teeth. That was the beginning of something new. Betrayal, crisis. I was 13. It was a Tuesday. I'd stayed late at the school library again, pretending to research for a paper, but really just lingering in the hush of rows and the glow of overhead lamps. I couldn't bring myself to go home early. The house felt like a gas leak I was always about to ignite by breathing wrong. When I finally did walk through the front door, the smell hit me like a slap. Garlic, butter, char, steak. Cassidy was already at the table, her phone propped up against a glass of peach soda, her voice syrupy sweet as she filmed herself cutting into a perfect medium-rare fillet. The plate shimmered under the kitchen light. Cornbread muffins with honey glaze, asparagus curled in spirals beside a ramekin of whipped potatoes topped with what looked like pink salt. My plate sat on the counter. A single slice of white bread, not toasted, just soft and cold. A smear of mayo sagging in the middle like a sad yellow grin. "Where's the rest?" I asked. Not loud, not angry, just too tired to pretend anymore. Dad stood by the sink, drying his hands. He turned slowly, like I'd triggered something he'd buried under shallow patience. "You asking that with your tone? It's not fair," I said. My voice didn't even shake. "Why does Cassidy get steak and I get this?" Cassidy didn't look up. She giggled. "Maybe because I don't look like a drowned rat?" Mom blinked once, then resumed scrolling on her phone. But Dad? He moved fast. Not like rage. Like purpose. Like someone who'd waited for an excuse. He closed the distance in 3 steps, grabbed my wrist, and slammed my hand down on the kitchen counter. His other hand reached into the junk drawer. There it was. The rusted hammer. No hesitation. Crack. The pain didn't register at first. Only the sound. Like dry wood splintering. Then came the screaming. I didn't even realize it was mine. Crack. Another finger, another bolt of agony. Purple spread under the skin before my eyes could blink. Blood pooling beneath the nail beds, knuckles jutting out like mislaid stones. "Ask that again," Dad hissed. He leaned close, so close I could smell the bourbon in his breath. "I dare you." Then he dropped the hammer onto the tile floor like it was trash. I dropped next, curled around my broken hand, choking on the pain. Cassidy took another bite of cornbread. "Tough love," she said, not even looking at me. Mom finally stood up. Not to help. Just to grab the remote. She turned the TV volume up and said, "Stop crying. You're ruining dinner." No hospital. No gauze. No concern. That night, they locked me in the basement. Just me, an old ice pack wrapped in a wet rag, and the damp mildew smell of concrete and mouse droppings. My hand swelled to twice its size. I could see the bones trying to force their way out of my skin. I didn't sleep. I rocked slowly in the dark, whispering to myself, not to stay alive, not exactly, but to remember. That was the night I changed. That was the night the seed of vengeance took root, because I knew no one was coming to save me. And that meant I had nothing left to lose. Emotional fallout. The days that followed were blurry, as if the world had been dipped in syrup. Everything was slower, heavier. My hand pulsed constantly, a swollen mass of color and pain. The fingers bent at angles that made me nauseous just to look at. But what stayed with me most wasn't the pain. It was how normal everything else stayed. Cassidy still filmed her videos, hair perfectly curled, bragging about her amazing family. Mom still dressed up for PTA meetings and said things like, "We're a values household." And Dad? He acted like it never happened. He even patted me on the head once 2 mornings later. My body flinched without permission. I remember lying awake in bed, blankets stiff with old blood, wondering if I was a ghost. If maybe I had died on that kitchen floor and now this was some cruel limbo, watching the world carry on while I dissolved from the inside. School became harder. I couldn't write without pain. I stopped answering questions. Stopped raising my hand. I used to love reading aloud in class. Now I barely whispered. The guidance counselor asked me once why I was quieter. I smiled and said, "Just tired." I was always tired. Tired from pretending my hand wasn't broken. Tired from swallowing my screams at night. Tired from the effort of being invisible during the day. But even in that exhaustion, something else stirred. A thought. A promise. I don't think it even had words at first. Just a spark, glowing somewhere beneath the pain. A knowing, this wouldn't be the end. That one day, I would make them see, make them remember. I started writing everything down with my left hand. Sloppy at first, barely legible. But I kept at it. Journals hidden under loose floorboards. Pages of what happened. Names. Dates. Quotes. I wrote it all. My fingers may have been broken, but my memory was sharper than ever. And every time my hand throbbed, every time I saw my reflection and caught that glimpse of crooked bones, I didn't feel shame. I felt direction. At school, I became a ghost in plain sight. Teachers stopped calling on me, not because I wasn't bright, but because I had gone dim. My eyes no longer lit up during lessons. My essays, once full of layered metaphors and careful observations, became mechanical, bullet-pointed, short. Nobody asked why. Once, I stayed in the bathroom stall through lunch. My hand throbbed beneath my hoodie sleeve. I pressed my teeth into the fabric to stop myself from crying out when I accidentally bumped the swollen knuckles against the metal partition. I remember staring at my shoes, thinking they didn't even match. One was slightly darker, an old pair handed down through 3 cousins. The other had a torn sole that let in rain. Cassidy roamed the halls with her entourage. Her laugh carried like perfume, sickly sweet and overdone. Everyone wanted her approval. Teachers excused her late homework, called her charming. One time I overheard a classmate say, "You know Lydia's her sister?" The response? No way. She looks adopted. That was the narrative. I didn't belong. Not at school. Not at home. Not even in the mirror. My mother once caught me wincing while buttering a piece of toast. She glanced at my hand and said, "Still faking it? You're more dramatic than you look." Then she walked away, humming. Dad ignored me entirely for a week after the hammer. When he did speak again, it was to tell me to take out the trash. He didn't acknowledge what happened. He just pretended the whole thing hadn't existed. Like he'd hit a reset button. But my fingers, still bent and bruised, didn't forget. They curled against each other, quiet witnesses to something unforgivable. I started avoiding the kitchen. The sound of drawers opening made me nauseous. I slept facing the door with my back pressed against the wall. I kept a pencil under my pillow, not because it could protect me, but because it was the closest thing I had to something sharp. There were nights I considered running. I planned routes in my head, cut through the park, past the old church, hitch a ride on the interstate. But the voice that stopped me wasn't fear. It was anger. "Not yet," it said. "Not like this." At the library, I found solace. I started sitting in the nonfiction section, particularly near books about psychology, child development, trauma. I read about gaslighting before I knew what it meant. I read about cycles of abuse and how some kids never escaped. And then I read a line I've never forgotten. "What is done in silence echoes in the child's bones." That line rattled through me like a tuning fork. I began writing more. Not just journaling, but copying conversations word for word. I recreated entire dinner scenes, documented Cassidy's lies, Mom's dismissals. I logged it all, like a researcher in the field. It gave me distance. Gave me control. One day, I found a notebook wedged behind a library shelf, left behind by someone else. It was full of poems, raw and angry. I never found out whose it was, but I added one of my own in the back pages. "You made me silent." But silence remembers. Every week I returned to that notebook, added another line, another secret. It became my hidden monument, a place where my pain was made visible, if only to me. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to shift inside me. I still hurt, still flinched. But the part of me that had curled into a ball on the kitchen floor, she was starting to uncurl. Not for them. For me, flashbacks and growth. Time doesn't heal everything. That's a lie people tell you when they want you to stop talking. What time does is layer your pain in dust, then dares you to wipe it off. Some days I did. Some days I left it buried. It was around that time, right after the silence settled into my bones, that I started volunteering at the animal shelter. It was Cassidy's idea, ironically enough. She thought it would look good on her college applications if she coordinated a youth volunteer initiative. I signed up without her knowing. The place was loud, chaotic. barking dogs, overfilled litter boxes, fluorescent lights that hummed constantly. But it was also honest. No one pretended there. If a dog didn't like you, it growled. If it loved you, it licked your face. No manipulation, no silent treatment. Just truth in fur and claws. That's where I met Donna. She was in her early 60s, skin like thick leather, and a voice like it had scraped its way through 100 stories. She ran the shelter like a ship captain. Tough, no nonsense, but deeply observant. The first day I met her, I spilled a tray of food bowls and whispered, "Sorry." She stared at my hand. The crookedness. The tremor. But said nothing. 2 weeks later she asked, "What happened to your fingers?" I hesitated. My throat closed. "Family recipe," I said, trying to be clever. Donna just nodded. She didn't pry. But the next time I showed up, there was a folder waiting for me on the desk. Inside, emancipation paperwork, housing resources, and 3 contact numbers scrawled in blue ink. "You didn't ask," she said. "But I see everything." That was the first moment I felt visible in years. Not fixed. Not rescued. Just seen. I kept going back. Every Saturday morning, rain or shine. I cleaned kennels, fed rescues, learned how to give meds, how to swaddle newborn kittens. I found rhythm in the routine. There was something sacred in the way creatures healed together in that space. At the same time, I joined the school theater tech crew, not to act, but to hide behind curtains, wires, and lighting rigs. It was a loophole in my curfew. If I stayed for rehearsals, I didn't have to go home right away. I learned how to build sets, how to program sound cues, how to run a spotlight. More importantly, I learned how to listen. People forgot about you when you wore all black and carried a clipboard. They gossiped. They confessed. They revealed themselves. I started carrying a tiny notebook in my back pocket. Not just for pain logs anymore, but for information, quotes, times, behaviors. Cassidy complaining about teachers. Mom making snide jokes on PTA calls. Dad's weekly absences. I took it all in. But I also started remembering. There were flashbacks. Always uninvited. A sudden smell, and I'd see the hammer. A loud bang, and I'd flinch so hard I dropped things. But I didn't let those moments own me. I studied them. Dissected them like lab frogs. Each flashback was a clue, a sign of what still needed healing. Some nights I dreamt of my younger self. Hiding in closets. Clutching a worn-out stuffed tiger named Peels. I'd watch her from the future, whispering to her, "You make it. Just keep breathing." My journals thickened. My voice sharpened. Donna started trusting me with new intakes. The drama teacher gave me keys to the lighting booth. I was still afraid, still flinching. But now I was moving. And that, I learned, was how you start rebuilding. Not with a roar, but with quiet, consistent steps. I started staying late at the radio station too. Donna knew someone at WRXJ, a local public broadcast studio. She said I had good ears and steady hands. I think she just knew I needed somewhere else to be. The station was quiet in the best way. Dim lights. Rows of old equipment. The faint hum of recordings in progress. I loved it there. Loved the way the soundboard looked like a spaceship. The way adjusting a single fader could change a story's emotion entirely. I didn't just learn technical skills. I learned narrative. The first time I heard my own voice in playback, I flinched. I wasn't used to being recorded. I had spent so long trying to be silent that hearing myself felt like a transgression. But Donna was patient. She made me read old PSA scripts. She showed me how to clean up background noise, how to master audio, how to speak from my diaphragm. "You're not invisible here," she said one day. "You're the one who gives voice to everything." That stuck. At school, Cassidy still played princess. She starred in a school play once. When she took a bow, everyone clapped. I stood in the back of the tech booth, spotlight pointed at her. No one looked up to see the hand that lit her stage. That night, I wrote in my notebook, "Let them have the applause, I'll take the power." Some nights, I took long walks, just to feel my feet on the ground. I passed houses with lights on in the windows, families laughing, TV glow flickering across living rooms. I wondered what it felt like to exist without looking over your shoulder. Once, I sat on a bench outside a 24-hour laundromat for an hour just watching strangers. One woman saw me and handed me a warm tea without saying a word. I didn't drink it, but I held it until my fingers stopped shaking. In my flashbacks, the hammer changed. It became metaphor. Sometimes it was Cassidy's voice, sharp and smug. Sometimes it was Mom's laughter when I cried. Sometimes it was the silence that followed a scream. I took those fragments and reshaped them. I turned one into a monologue and recorded it at the station late at night. I didn't name names, just told a story about a girl no one saw until she saw herself. I never aired it, but I played it back once, alone, lights dimmed. And I cried. Not because I was sad, but because the voice I heard, my voice, sounded like someone who might survive this. Donna started inviting me to staff meetings at the shelter. I learned intake protocols, adoption procedures. I helped coordinate a fundraiser that brought in enough money to fix the back kennels. One of the donors shook my hand and said, "You've got leadership energy." I almost laughed. If they only knew. Back at school, Cassidy accused me of stealing her lip gloss. I hadn't even been in the same room. She yelled at me in front of her friends. I didn't flinch. I just stared at her until she turned away. One of the girls later found me in the hall and whispered, "She's scared of you now." I wasn't proud of that. But I wasn't sorry either. I started dressing differently. Not louder, just more me. Hoodies that didn't hide my frame. Shirts with messages that made people pause. I stopped apologizing for bumping into people. I took up space. And all the while, I kept logging everything. My journals now filled an entire shoebox, each one color-coded. Every lie, every cruelty, every broken promise categorized by date. I had created an archive of my own life, not as they told it, but as it truly happened. That gave me a strange kind of peace. I even began sketching again. Donna gave me a small watercolor set. Said she found it in a donation bin. I painted a girl once, crooked fingers, big eyes, standing in a thunderstorm but unafraid. I named her after. Because that's who I was becoming. Turning point. It started with a wire. At the radio station, we had a broken lav mic pack, one of the old models used for theater interviews. It crackled on transmission but could still record to micro SD. Donna handed it to me one afternoon and said, "Toss it, unless you want to fix it." I took it home. The station was getting newer gear anyway, so no one noticed when I kept it. I had already learned how to strip wire, resolder terminals, patch firmware. The mic worked enough. Just enough. And that's when the idea started forming. Not fully, not like a movie montage. It came like a slow leak of water, drip, drip, into the part of my brain that had been patiently waiting for its chance. I knew their habits by then. Knew when Dad left for church board meetings that weren't church. Knew when Cassidy faked her charity TikToks, props bought with PTA money, footage staged in front of the neighbor's fence. Knew when Mom made calls pretending to reconcile field trip accounts, but really ordered wine from a private distributor using school funds. They thought I wasn't listening. They thought silence meant surrender. So, I began gathering. First, audio. I rigged the mic under Dad's recliner in the living room. Set it to record on timer. Every day from 6 to 10 p.m., it stored data to a hidden cloud folder. At night, I listened. I cataloged. Their conversations weren't always damning, but they added up. "Mom, just write a check from the bake sale pool. No one tracks those anyway." Cassidy, "I'll pretend to serve soup again if someone films it this time." "Dad, if that girl mouths off again, I swear I'll take her tongue next." "Should have finished the job with the hammer." I paused the recording there. Rewound it. Played it again. Just to make sure I heard it right. Then saved the file under a new folder named Crown Jewel. At school, Cassidy was still a star. But now I noticed cracks. Friends rolling their eyes. Teachers quietly adjusting her grades. I asked around casually, like I didn't care. Turns out Cassidy had been caught plagiarizing once, but Mom smoothed it over with a donation. I made note of that too. At the radio station, I started staying later, editing my recordings, learning how to pitch audio into public formats. I experimented with narration. Not mine, yet, but others, anonymous voices speaking truth. It was there, one night around 11 p.m., when I realized what I was building. Not revenge, a record. A story so complete, so undeniable, that that it wouldn't need fire or shouting. It would just play itself. I started writing the podcast script. I gave it a working title, The Leftover Daughter. No one knew. Not Donna. Not the station techs. Not even the girls at the shelter. This was mine. My blueprint. My map. Then came graduation. Cassidy got a car. A hybrid with a pink bow and a ribbon-covered post captioned, "Hard work pays off. #blessed." I got a shrug. That night, I didn't cry. I packed. I left a note on the fridge, "You broke me. But not forever. Keep the toast. I've got a bigger table now. Lydia." At midnight, I walked out. Backpack slung over my shoulder. Thumb drive in my pocket. Donna met me at the shelter. No words. Just a nod and a spare cot. But I wasn't done. 3 envelopes. 3 targets. To the church board, the audio files of Dad, his threats, his cruelty, his drunken admissions. To the PTA committee, Mom's skimmed donations, her mocking remarks about those broke kids and their sad little lunches. To the school superintendent, Cassidy's full TikTok archive including her charity for clout content and private texts bragging about it. I mailed them all on the same day. Then I uploaded the first and only episode of my podcast, My Voice. My story. Scored with quiet piano, raw and direct. Just titled, The Leftover Daughter. And I waited. The first night the podcast went live, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in Donna's spare cot, earbuds in, listening to my own voice narrate pain like it was a case study. The intro was soft, measured. This isn't about blame, this is about memory, about how truth gets buried until someone dares to unearth it. I didn't name them. That was the brilliance of it. I didn't have to. The story wasn't slander, it was survival. By morning, it had 2,000 downloads. By evening, 10,000. Someone clipped a line from the final segment and posted it to TikTok. The line, "When you break a child's fingers, you teach her how to type her own truth." It went viral. People stitched it. Wrote songs with it. Read it aloud like scripture. I watched from the sidelines as hashtags trended. People asked, "Who is she?" Others guessed. Speculated. One girl messaged the podcast account and wrote, "I thought I was the only one." The next week was a storm. Cassidy's brand partnerships ghosted her. Her TikTok comments flooded with steak emojis and quotes from the podcast. "Guess you weren't the only daughter," someone wrote. Another said, "Steaks off the menu, Cassidy." Mom got called into a closed-door PTA meeting. She left an hour later, pale and shaking. The school board launched an audit into fundraising expenditures. Field trips were postponed. Dad lost his church title. The board cited unbecoming conduct and emerging allegations. And none of them could prove who did it. Because I never used my full name. My metadata was scrubbed. My files encrypted. I had built the record like a ghost, but it wasn't over yet. Then came the house. I saw the listing late one night. 4-bedroom fixer-upper. Owner seeking immediate offload. Price reduced. I clicked the address. My old house. Turns out, after Cassidy's influencer collapse and Mom's PTA disgrace, the money dried up. Fast. Dad's side hustles didn't cover the mortgage. The house fell into pre-foreclosure. I called Donna. "I need a favor," I said. She didn't ask questions. Just said, "Get me the paperwork." Her cousin worked with a nonprofit that helped young adults transition into first-time housing. They matched grants. Prioritized survivors. I sent them my podcast. They approved me in 48 hours. 1 week later, I stood on the porch I used to scrub with bleach after crying on its steps. Clipboard in hand. Hoodie zipped. Calm. I signed the purchase agreement without blinking. On closing day, they were still moving boxes. Cassidy crying into her phone. Dad pacing, yelling about lawyers. Mom silent. I walked right past them. "Cassidy, what are you doing here?" Dad froze. His voice was quieter now, harsher around the edges. I held up my key. "I told you I'd get a bigger table." And I stepped inside. That night, I didn't scream. Didn't dance. I unpacked one thing. A brand new dining table. On it, I placed 3 items, a recording device, my hand's X-ray, and a brass nameplate, Lydia Holloway, survivor, not servant. Justice and aftermath. The first morning in the house was quiet, not dead quiet like before. This was a different kind. A kind that hummed, like a stage before the lights go up. I sat on the floor in front of the dining table, fingers tracing the edge of my nameplate. The X-ray sat beside me, a ghostly echo of pain past. It was strange being here, knowing I didn't have to listen for footsteps overhead. I could breathe. I could be. But the real weight hadn't hit yet. Not until the letters started coming in. The first was from the church. A short typed apology addressed to the previous homeowner, explaining that Reverend Holloway would no longer be permitted in any leadership capacity and had been asked to seek spiritual counseling. I read it twice before folding it and placing it under the nameplate. The second was from the school board. They found discrepancies in the PTA accounts spanning 3 years. Field trip funds misappropriated. Receipts doctored. My mother was banned from campus events indefinitely and referred to a local prosecutor. Then came the social blowback. Cassidy's former friends started messaging the podcast anonymously. Some apologized. Others confessed. One wrote, "She made us hate you." We believed her. Another sent a video of Cassidy screaming at a Starbucks barista, calling her a charity case. That video went viral too. By the second week, their lives weren't just unraveling. They were being held up like artifacts. People dissected every post, every quote. Internet sleuths tracked inconsistencies. Former churchgoers made Facebook posts titled, "The Holloway Myth." I didn't join in. I didn't repost. I didn't comment. I didn't have to. Donna stopped by often. She brought a kettle for the kitchen and a small jade plant. "New roots," she said. She also brought others. Girls from the shelter, volunteers from the radio station. We painted the living room in muted greens and soft browns. We ripped out the stained carpet in the den. One girl, Maya, stared at the basement door and asked, "Do you want it locked?" I shook my head. No more locks. Instead, we turned the basement into a recording studio. I tore down the old moldy curtains and hung acoustic panels. Foam tiles, mic stands. I kept the lighting soft. No fluorescence. I painted one wall a deep navy blue. It felt honest. It felt safe. The new podcast episodes weren't about me. They were interviews, other stories of survival. Stories people submitted from all over. Some were kids. Some were in their 60s. Some cried. Some laughed. All of them were real. I called the series Table for One. And the intro said, "Sometimes you eat alone. Sometimes that's how you heal." Listeners poured in. The first 3 episodes reached 50,000 streams. Then 100,000. Then major outlets reached out. Offers, features, syndication. I ignored most of them. Because that wasn't the point. The point was to build something that outlived the silence. One afternoon, Cassidy came by. She stood outside the fence, her hair disheveled, mascara smudged. She didn't look like the girl from TikTok. She looked like someone who hadn't eaten well in a while. I stepped onto the porch. "I just want to talk," she said. I didn't answer. "You ruined everything," she whispered. "They hate us now. They don't know your name," I said. "Only mine." She stared at the house. "You live here alone?" "No," I said. "With the truth." She left without saying more. I never saw her again. Dad tried once too. Sent a letter. Said he was seeking redemption and hoped we could meet as adults. I shredded it without reading the second page. Mom never reached out. That was her final trick. Pretending none of it happened. She disappeared into whatever place denial builds. And I stayed. I worked. I lived. I hosted dinners. Not often, but enough. Girls with bent shoulders and wide eyes. Boys who flinched when someone dropped a plate. We ate on real plates. We passed food with both hands. No one left hungry. And every time I set a place at the table, I made sure one chair stayed empty. Not for the ones who hurt me. For the girl I used to be. There's a moment every night, just before sleep, where the house breathes. Not creaks or groans, actual breath. As if the walls have learned to inhale without fear. I lie in bed sometimes and listen to it. The hallway light glows faintly through my door. The dining table sits beneath it, wood polished, nameplate centered, X-ray framed behind glass. It's not just furniture anymore. It's a monument. Sometimes I touch the scar on my hand before I close my eyes. A reminder, not of what was done to me, but of what I did with it. They tried to teach me silence, but I turned it into story. The podcast continues. Every month, a new voice, a new letter, a new survivor stepping forward. I rarely speak now. Just produce. Just listen. That's the power, I've learned. Not always being the voice, but giving others the stage. The house no longer feels haunted. The kitchen smells like cinnamon sometimes, thanks to a friend who bakes. The living room hums with low music. There's a framed print by the door that reads, "You are not what they called you." I keep my old journals in a box under the bed. Every few months, I open them. Not to dwell. To witness. To remember that girl who whispered to herself in a locked basement, promising that someday she'd make it out. She did. Donna visits less now. She says I've got this. But when she does come by, she brings cornbread. We sit on the porch, sipping tea, talking about nothing. That's the luxury of healing. The ability to talk about nothing and feel full. One afternoon, Maya asked me what I would say if I ever saw my father again. I thought about it. Long and hard. I wouldn't say anything, I finally answered. Why not? Because he already heard me, I said. And he knows what it cost him. That night, I added one last entry to the back of my final journal. A single sentence. When the world told me I was a mistake, I built a life they couldn't erase. And then I closed it. The girl they broke is gone. The woman I became walks barefoot through her own house, opens her own doors, and sets her own table. Every day, I light one candle at dinner. Not for mourning, not even for memory, but for presence. Because I am here, fully.